The clapping hit me like a punch to the chest. And the new director of operations, my father's voice boomed to the crowded ballroom, his hand raised triumphantly. My son, Tyler. My blood froze. That wasn't my name. My work. The more expansion project designs, the detailed operational blueprints, the 5-year growth projections I'd spent 18 months perfecting, flashed across the massive projection screen behind the podium. Every spreadsheet, every calculation, every vision I'd poured into this company's future, all of it under Tyler's name. He stood, grinning that lazy grin that had always made my jaw tighten, draping an arm around our father like he'd just claimed a crown, like he'd earned it. Cameras clicked frantically. The room erupted in applause. Everyone stared at me, the architect of the expansion, relegated to the back row, waiting for my reaction. My lips forced a smile. Muscle memory from 31 years of practice. But inside, something shattered. Not loudly, not dramatically. But finally, I left through the glass doors into the December rain, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. I could feel my father's eyes boring into my back as I crossed the ballroom floor. He didn't follow. He never did. The cold rain hit my face in angry sheets. I didn't move. I just stood there, letting it soak through my designer suit, watching the city lights blur through the downpour. That was the moment I realized I'd spent 3 decades chasing the love of a man who would never see me. Not because he couldn't see me, because he'd chosen not to. My name is Elliot Moore, and for 31 years, I've been invisible to the man who should have loved me most. My father, Richard Moore, had built his construction empire from nothing. I watched him do it, helped him do it, from the moment I was old enough to carry blueprints and organize bid sheets. I was 8 when he let me file his first contracts, 12 when he taught me to read architectural plans, 16 when I started actually designing them. By 20, I was his right hand. By 25, his visionary. By 30, his ghost. The turning point came when my father had an affair. He'd been married to my mother, Susan, for 32 years. A good woman, a patient woman. Too patient, perhaps. When the affair ended his marriage, he didn't end it quietly. He married Mara, Tyler's mother, within 6 months, and suddenly my childhood home wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a shrine to a boy who'd barely lifted a finger in his life. Tyler was 23 when he entered our lives. Handsome in that effortless way that comes from never having to try. Charming in the way that requires no substance. He walked into my father's company, into my father's heart, and into my carefully constructed life like he owned it all along. And my father treated him like he did. I remember the exact moment. I knew everything had changed. I was carrying blueprints up the office stairs, the 4th floor of the Moore building, where Dad kept his private office. Tyler was following behind, talking on his phone, not paying attention to anything but his own reflection in the glass walls. Dad emerged from his office. "Tyler," he said, and something in his voice made my stomach drop. "Come here." He dropped his hand on Tyler's shoulder. A hand I'd been waiting my entire life to feel on mine in that way. That proud way. "You know you'll take over one day," Dad said, his voice warm in a way I'd never heard before. "You're going to be exceptional at this. I can see it in you. You've got instincts. You've got presence." Tyler just smiled and shrugged like it was obvious, like he'd always known. Dad glanced at me then, still on the stairs with my arms full of blueprints. His expression shifted to something gentler, more pitying. "Elliot's good," he said. "Elliot works hard. But Tyler," he turned back to his younger son. "Tyler's a natural." The blueprints didn't fall from my hands. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. I just stood there, frozen, while my father confirmed what I'd somehow always suspected. I was the effort. Tyler was the gift. That night at dinner, my father looked at me across the table. Mara was in the kitchen, and Tyler was on his phone, and he smiled that soft, patronizing smile I'd grow to hate. "I hope you understand, Elliot," he said gently, like he was explaining something complicated to a child. "Everyone has their strengths. Tyler's are different from yours. That doesn't make yours less valuable." I nodded. I always nodded. I swallowed the lump in my throat and cut my steak into smaller pieces, so I'd have something to do with my hands. From the other room, Tyler's laugh echoed through the house, sharp and bright and celebrated. That night, I lay in bed, listening to him talk on the phone through the thin walls. He was telling someone about a girl he'd met, about a party he was planning, about how easy everything had always been for him. His voice carried the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of being told you're special. I wondered what it felt like. In the office, over the next several years, Tyler's incompetence was celebrated like competence. He would waltz into board meetings without reading the reports I prepared. He'd make suggestions I'd already considered and rejected for solid financial reasons, and my father would listen to him as though he'd just invented genius itself. I stayed silent. When Tyler claimed credit for the Henderson account, a project I brought in 3 years of negotiations, I didn't say anything. When he presented my market analysis as his own research, I smiled and said nothing. When investors praised him for vision that came entirely from my late nights and careful planning, I congratulated him silently and kept working. One night, after a particularly egregious theft of credit during a board presentation, I finally confronted him privately in his office. "Tyler," I said, closing the door quietly, "the Southeast expansion proposal. That was my work, my analysis, my pitch to the Henderson Group." He looked up from his phone, confused, like I'd spoken to him in a language he didn't understand. "Yeah," he said finally, like it was obvious. "Dad's proud of me. You don't get it, Elliot. It's not personal." "It's not personal," I repeated. "No," he said, turning back to his phone. "It's just business." I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles bled, but I smiled as I left his office. I always smiled. My mother noticed. Of course. Susan had left our father 3 years prior, but she still loved me with a kind of fierce, unconditional love that made the other kind, the conditional, transactional love my father offered, even more painful by comparison. "You're killing yourself trying to make him see you," she said one evening, sitting in my apartment over tea. "And Elliot, he's not going to, not because of anything you're doing, because he's chosen not to." I didn't answer her then, but I was beginning to understand what she meant. By 30, I had a corner office, and the building my designs had expanded. I had a 6-figure salary. I had the respect of every contractor, architect, and investor who'd ever worked with me. And I had nothing from a man whose opinion I'd been chasing since I was 8 years old. Mara didn't help. She'd sip wine at family dinners and say things like, "Tyler's so brilliant, Elliot. You should really learn from him. He just has a gift for leadership." She'd smile while saying it, her Botox smooth and her diamonds glinting in the candlelight, and I'd wonder if she actually believed what she was saying or she just enjoyed watching my father glow every time she praised his golden child. The warmth I'd once sought from my father, the validation I'd craved like oxygen, dissolved every time I watched him light up for Tyler. Every time he dismissed my ideas with a wave of his hand. Every time he told me I was good, but not exceptional. By 30, I'd accepted the truth. I would never be exceptional to him, but I could be exceptional to myself. 2 nights before the projection ballroom ceremony, Tyler had boasted in front of a room full of investors about the Moore expansion project. He called it his vision, his triumph. He talked about the market analysis like he'd invented the concept of supply and demand. He presented my spreadsheets with the casual confidence of someone who'd actually created them. My father clapped first. The investors followed. I watched from the back of the room, feeling my chest tighten, watching my life's work celebrated under someone else's name. And I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, that I'd felt for years. This was clarity. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of whiskey and a yellow legal pad, and I started writing down everything. Every project Tyler had stolen, every credit he'd taken, every mistake he'd covered up or blamed on someone else, every dollar that had walked out the door under his management. By 3 a.m, I had 67 pages of notes. By dawn, I had a plan. I didn't build it in anger. Anger is sloppy. Anger is loud. Anger gets caught. Instead, I built it in silence, with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made me valuable to my father in the first place. First, I met with Mr. Hughes, the family accountant. Hughes was 72 years old and had been doing our books for 20 years. He'd seen everything in the Moore family that happened behind closed doors, and unlike most people in my life, he'd actually acknowledged my work. He'd told me, years ago, that I had good instincts. I called him on a Tuesday morning and asked if we could meet privately, not at the office, somewhere quiet. We met at a coffee shop near the river, the kind of place where no one looks at each other and everyone minds their own business. Hughes ordered black coffee. I ordered tea, and then he slid a manila folder across the table. "I've been waiting for you to ask," he said simply. "I've been holding this for 4 years." Inside the folder was everything. Tax irregularities dating back to when Tyler started. Falsified permits submitted for projects that hadn't passed safety inspections. Contractor accounts that had been paid with company funds and never reported. Invoices altered to cover up cost overruns. Financial statements that didn't match the actual ledgers. I looked up at Hughes. "Why?" I asked. "Because I knew it would destroy your father's company if it came out wrong," Hughes said quietly. "And I knew you wouldn't let that happen without a reason. I was waiting for you to give me one." "And now I have," I said. He nodded. "I have a contact at the city permits office," Hughes said, "and another at the state contractors licensing board. They've been waiting too, waiting for someone to care enough to come forward." I closed the folder gently and thanked him. Then I did the hardest thing I'd ever done. I waited. For 6 months, I built my own life quietly. I rented a small office downtown under the name E. Morgan, and I started taking on clients that my father's company had ignored. Small businesses, nonprofits, restoration projects that require precision and care rather than flash and speed. My work flourished. Meanwhile, Tyler's arrogance blinded him to the cracks appearing in my father's empire. Projects started falling behind schedule. Contractors began refusing to work with him. Permits started getting denied for the projects he managed. He'd thrown lavish parties with investors, laughed off concerns about safety inspections, assumed that our father would always shield him from consequences. He was right. My father did shield him, until he couldn't anymore. I didn't intervene. I simply built my foundation, brick by brick, while they pranced through their empire like it would never fall. My mother noticed a shift in me. One afternoon, 6 months into my secret company, she came to my downtown office. I didn't think she'd know about it. I'd been careful, but she walked in like she'd always known where I was. "You've stopped trying to please him," she said softly, looking around at the modest space I created. Her voice trembled slightly, like she was watching something sacred. I nodded. I couldn't quite find the words yet. "It's terrifying," she continued, more to herself than to me. "Years of conditioning, of bending to his will. It doesn't disappear overnight. But Elliot, your father, he's never going to give you what you need from him. So you have to learn to give it to yourself." She hugged me then, and I felt something in my chest loosen just slightly. One rainy Thursday in March, exactly 7 months after the ballroom ceremony, my father called. "Elliot," he said, his voice tight in a way I'd never heard before. "Come in, please." He sounded anxious. I drove to the office slowly, taking my time. I wasn't nervous. I was curious about how this would feel. When I arrived, he was in his office, the door closed. He looked smaller than I remembered him, older, like something was eating him from the inside. "The Henderson account is falling apart," he said without preamble. "Tyler's been handling it, but there are issues, financial discrepancies. The client is threatening to pull out. Elliot, I need you to look at it. I need you to fix it." I paused, holding the phone. Inside, I felt no anger, no satisfaction, no vindication, only clarity. "I'm no longer available," I said calmly. "What?" "I'm not available," I repeated, "for Tyler's mistakes, for your expectations, for the role you cast me in. I'm no longer available." I hung up. He didn't call back that day. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He only exhaled like he'd suddenly realized the boy he'd ignored had finally stopped running. The public reckoning began on a Tuesday morning at a city inspection meeting. Tyler strode in like he owned the room. He was wearing an expensive suit and carrying himself with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never faced actual consequences. My father was beside him, still trying to project confidence, still trying to protect his golden child. Then the documents appeared. 6 city inspectors entered with permit files, financial records, and construction safety reports. A state contractor licensing board representative entered, and then Mr. Hughes walked in with a briefcase full of evidence. The room went quiet. "We're here," the lead inspector said, "to address multiple violations of state building codes, falsified permits, and financial irregularities involving the Moore Construction Company." The documents were spread across the table. Every falsification exposed. Every permit forged. Every safety inspection that had been bypassed in favor of speed and profit. Cameras clicked. Reporters who'd been tipped off started recording. Investors who'd been promised exclusive access to this meeting murmured to each other, piecing things together. Tyler's jaw dropped like it was attached to a string someone had cut. My father's face turned pale. He looked at Tyler like he was seeing him for the first time, like he was trying to recognize the stranger beside him. "Tyler," he whispered. Just that one word. Tyler tried to talk, to charm his way out like he always had. He tried to deny. He tried to argue. But the evidence was absolute. It was all there. Every crime. Every lie. Every shortcut he'd taken while my father watched him with admiring eyes. The public fallout was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, 3 major contracts were canceled. 5 investors pulled out. Tyler's credibility, such as it was, evaporated like morning fog. News outlets picked up the story. Contractor's son implicated in permit fraud. State launches investigation into more construction. My father appeared in one photograph, looking like a man who'd been struck by lightning. Still alive, but fundamentally changed. The criminal investigation took 3 weeks. Tyler faced felony charges for permit fraud. My father faced accusations of negligent oversight. Their lawyers worked frantically to negotiate a settlement that would keep both of them out of prison. But the damage to the company was irreversible. I remained unseen through all of it. I didn't give statements to reporters. I didn't appear at any of the hearings. I simply observed quietly, knowing that the life I'd built could never be taken by them. I remembered every childhood humiliation as I watched my father's empire crumble. The unacknowledged awards. The science fair project I won in 9th grade that Tyler later told people was his idea. The dinners where Tyler's marginal accomplishments eclipsed my substantial work. The subtle gaslighting that had convinced me I imagined my own worth. All of it had forged patience, clarity, and now, finally, a quiet triumph. I didn't revel in it. That's what I want to be clear about. This wasn't revenge fantasy. I didn't laugh or celebrate or feel some great rush of satisfaction when I heard about Tyler's indictment. If anything, I felt a strange kind of sadness. Sadness that my father had chosen pride over love, that he'd chosen favoritism over loyalty, that he'd taught his younger son that the world owed him something. But I wasn't sorry. Not anymore. Tyler's arrogance had blinded him to the smallest details. The details that matter. Contractors refused to answer his calls. Permits got denied with bureaucratic finality. Investors, having learned the company was a house of cards, withdrew their support and their faith. My father's empire began crumbling under Tyler's ineptitude, exactly the way a tree collapses under its own rotted weight. I focused on building my own company. By month 8 of E. Morgan Designs, I had more projects than I could handle. Non-profit restoration work, historic building renovations, boutique residential developments that required artistry and precision. Every project was earned without shortcut or favoritism. Every client came to me because I was the best at what I did. I sent no threatening messages. I made no statements to the press. I didn't need to. My success was silent but undeniable. One evening, my father called. This time, his voice was different. Quieter. Broken. "Elliot," he said, "we're losing everything." I sat back in my office chair. looking out at the city lights. My heart was steady. I know, I said softly. I've known for months. I don't understand, he said. Why didn't you help? Why didn't you tell me what was happening with Tyler? I was quiet for a long moment. Because, I said finally, I stopped trying to earn what was never yours to give. I stopped trying to make you see me. And somewhere in that stopping, I started to actually see myself. He didn't respond. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. I offered you loyalty for 31 years. I continued. And you treated it like it was nothing. So when you needed me, when you needed my help, my talent, my problem solving, I was finally free to say no. Elliot, I'm not angry anymore, Dad, I said, and I realized as I said that it was true. I'm just done. I hung up gently, not in anger, just in finality. My mother smiled softly as I shared my own progress a few weeks later. We were having tea at her new place, the one she'd built for herself after leaving my father. It was warm and full of light. You finally stopped trying to make him proud, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. And you became proud of yourself instead. I nodded. The relief was bittersweet. Years of seeking approval were gone, replaced with self-worth I had carved myself, brick by brick, decision by decision. Tyler's collapse was merely the world catching up to reality. It was karma in its truest form. Not punishment delivered by my hand, but consequences delivered by the universe for a life built on arrogance and theft. Tyler tried to reach out to me 3 months later. He sent emails asking for advice. He called my office. He eventually showed up in person, looking diminished in a way that broke my heart slightly, even after everything. I need your help, he said, sitting across from my desk. The legal situation, the business, I can't handle it. I've never had to handle real problems before. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw a man who'd never learned to build anything, who'd only learned to take. His collapse was deserved. Every insult he'd thrown my way, every glance of superiority, every moment he claimed credit for my work. It had all been earned by arrogance and laziness. I can't help you, I said, not unkindly. And I won't. Why not? He asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. Because, I said, some lessons can only be learned by living with their consequences, and you need to learn this one. He left without another word. 2 months later, there was a family dinner. My father attempted to host it at the family home. Trying to save face in front of extended family and a few investors, he was hoping to work with going forward. It was a desperate gesture, born of pride and the fading hope that if he could just present the right image, everything would go back to normal. Tyler attended. He faltered through introductions, mispronouncing names he should have known. He forgot details about projects he claimed to have designed. The subtle whispers and sideways glances made him shrink. My father's massive control faltered. You could see him try and protect Tyler, try and present him as capable, but there was nothing left to defend. The foundation was gone. I watched from near the window, feeling nothing but a strange, calm serenity. Investors left mid-dinner, citing lack of reliability and confidence. My father's color drained. He looked older than he had at the ballroom ceremony. Diminished. Elliot, he said, when he finally found me near the kitchen. You could have helped. You could have prevented all of this. I shook my head slowly. I stopped trying to earn what was never yours to give. I said, my job was never to save you, Dad. My job was to live my life, which I'm finally doing. His lips pressed into a tight line. His pride was shattered, quietly and painfully, like a glass figure dropped on tile. Later that night, alone in the study, my father finally sat down. He looked exhausted and hollow, like he'd finally stopped fighting. I failed you, Elliot, he said quietly. I failed you. I leaned back, sipping the tea I'd made myself. No triumph, no gloating, only serenity and the strange kind of sadness that comes from finally laying down a burden you've carried too long. You failed yourself first, I said gently. I didn't need your approval to know my worth. I just needed to stop looking for it in the wrong place. He nodded slowly, understanding finally beginning to dawn in his eyes. By fall, Tyler had taken a settlement deal with the state. No prison time, but significant restitution and 5 years of probation. The Moore Construction Company had been restructured and sold off in pieces. My father had resigned from his position. The empire he'd built had crumbled, partly under Tyler's incompetence and partly under the weight of my father's own choices. He'd called me once more, quietly, with no demands. Only regret. "I see you now," he said. "I see what you were trying to tell me all those years." "I know," I said softly. And I did know, but knowing was different from doing. And I'd learned a long time ago not to wait for my father to do the right thing. I listened to him for a few minutes. He told me he was sorry. He told me he loved me. He told me he'd been wrong. And I nodded politely and let the line go silent. He didn't push. He didn't ask me to forgive him or come back or be the fixer in his life anymore. He just let me go. Months later, I stood in my own office, in my own building, overlooking the city lights. The office was modern but warm, floor-to-ceiling windows, plants that I actually remembered to water, photos of projects I designed on the walls, designs that bore my name now, designs that would last long after I was gone. My mother had come to see it when it first opened. She'd walk through quietly, and then she cried. Happy tears. "You did this," she said, running her hand along the brick walls I'd personally selected for their warmth and character. "You built this, not for approval, just for you." And she was right. I'd stopped trying to please my father. I'd stopped running for his applause. I'd stopped seeking validation in his eyes. And in that stopping, I'd finally found myself. My life now was quiet, grounded, earned. I woke up and did work that mattered to me. I went to bed knowing that every success was genuinely mine. I didn't look for my father's approval in my accomplishments anymore. I didn't measure my worth against my brother's failure. I just lived. Simply, honestly, fully. My father's business had become a cautionary tale. The Moore collapse, they called it. A story about what happens when you choose favoritism over merit, when you reward arrogance and ignore loyalty, when you raise a son to believe he's entitled to everything without earning anything. Sometimes I'd see articles about it in the business press. Sometimes I'd read about my father's attempts to rebuild. But I'd moved on from that story a long time ago. One night, sitting alone in my office, watching the city lights shimmer below me, I whispered something to myself, a kind of affirmation, a kind of goodbye. I stopped trying to please him. I said softly, smiling, and he panicked. And then I paused, corrected myself. "But that's not really what happened," I said to the empty room. "The truth is, I stopped trying to please him. And in that moment, I finally started to live. The rest was just the world catching up to what had always been true. I was never the problem. I was always enough." I spent 31 years seeking approval from someone who'd already decided I wasn't worth seeing. I learned something in that silence. Respect is non-negotiable. Your worth isn't defined by anyone else's narrative, not by stolen credit, not by who your family believes first. My story proves that silence can be a weapon and patience can be power. The moment I stopped trying to earn what was never theirs to give, everything changed. If you've been gaslit into invisibility, if you've bent yourself small for someone who refused to look, I'm speaking directly to you. Your silence doesn't make you weak. Your boundaries don't make you difficult. Your survival makes you extraordinary. You don't need permission to be seen. You don't need approval to matter. You only need the courage to stop performing for an audience that was never truly watching. The revolution happens when you decide to write your own ending. Subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your worth, setting boundaries that hold, and transforming humiliation into triumph. Because your value was never in question. It was only ever waiting to be remembered. Hit that bell. Share this with someone living in someone else's shadow. Let them know you're allowed to step into the light.